I would like to turn it over now to Alison Lingane with Project Equity to talk really about how employee ownership can be used as a tool to address many of the challenges we're seeing today.
Wonderful. Thank you. Really appreciate being a part of this conversation. So I'm going to just quickly go into, there we are. Here's who Project Equity is. I'm Alison Lingane, co-founder. We are a national nonprofit, and we're a part of really a movement that is underway to harness employee ownership to preserve small businesses, sustain quality jobs, and honor selling business owners' legacies. And the state of Colorado is right on the forefront of that movement. So it's exciting to see what you guys are doing. So I'm going to be talking with you about the benefits of employee ownership and why we believe it's critical to embed in communities' agendas for recovery and for rebuilding with resiliency. I start with a brief story about a business that we helped to transition to employee ownership over 3 years ago. Meet Ren. He is one of the founding worker owners at A Slice of New York, which is a pizzeria based in the San Francisco Bay Area. And they have 2 locations, about 35 employees. And when they became a worker co-op in 2017, at the time they were a 10-year-old business. And the sale of the business to become a worker co-op provided the founders of the company with a market rate financial exit. Really, really important for them at that period in their life. And the impact on the workers has also been profound. Over the last 2 years, A Slice of New York has distributed more than $600,000 of profits. And this is on top of raising wages. The company itself experienced tax savings, making it easier for the business to share the financial benefits with the full employee base. So I share this story just because these are it demonstrates a few of the reasons why employee ownership is an important tool to support small businesses and workers. Now, the backdrop of today's small business reality, of course, we have a ton of challenges, and we see really twin crises facing small businesses right now. Before COVID, we had the silver tsunami of retiring business owners. About half of all privately held job-creating small businesses are owned by people of retirement age. And so we're deeply concerned about the potential for further wealth concentration in communities coming out of the COVID crisis as locally owned businesses either close down or are bought up by private equity or larger companies. And we've now been in the COVID crisis, unprecedented crisis, for so many months now, and we've seen businesses doing everything that they can do to stay alive. And we've seen some business owners decide, especially those of the retirement age generation, that now is just the time to shut down forever rather than weather the crisis. And in Colorado in particular, this data is from a study that we did based on census data to give a flavor of the scope of this silver tsunami. So with over 50,000 businesses owned by baby boomers in Colorado, how many of those business owners will want to forward invest right now to ensure that their company weathers the crisis? So that's the big concern. And of course, we know from the workers' perspective, it's become even more clear during this crisis, workers, especially our essential workers, right, are anything but economically secure. Okay, so how does employee ownership fit into that? Well, we see it as both a means and an end in the current crisis. Employee ownership brings higher employee engagement, something that is absolutely critical in this time period of tremendous uncertainty and change. And it also makes businesses stronger while improving the economic resiliency of workers. I'm going to share a brief story about workforce engagement from one of our clients. This is Mandela Grocery. They're a worker cooperative, and their cooperative workflow has really been on full display since the shelter-in-place order was enacted in early March. They are also Bay Area based. Initially, from COVID, as with most grocery businesses, the demand on their business increased about a third. And then they saw when the protest against police violence in the Black community began, that demand increased again due to consumers wanting to support Black-owned businesses. So this increase in sales required them, to purchase, receive, and stock almost twice as much as they usually do. And pictured here is Andrea Talley. She's their general manager, and the way she tells this is she says, overall, our team has really grown stronger as a result of COVID-19, and that in fact, a beautiful kind of teamwork is how she talks about it, started happening in her store. Nobody asked anyone to do it. So this is the power of that employee engagement due to ownership. It just started happening. And everyone knows what their roles is and they know what to do. They made decisions together about reducing their operating hours so they could do proper sanitation. They voted to close on Sundays so they could give themselves a rest given the increased demand. And so we really see in employee-owned businesses that engagement is high and that it creates stronger companies. We have data to back that up. So these are two studies, one on the left from the Democracy at Work Institute, that this is focused on worker-owned cooperatives, that shows that profit margins are 8.5% higher than industry peers that are non-employee owned. We also see from a study from the National Center for Employee Ownership that both sales and employment levels grow 2% year after year after year in employee-owned companies. So really big impacts on the business itself. We also see that employee owners are significantly less likely to be laid off. During normal times, they're 6 times less likely to be laid off. And during the last 2 recessions, employee owners were 50% less likely to be laid off. And this is a story from Recology, which is a company that has 3,800 employee owners. They work across 3 states in the waste management industry. And right after the shelter in place came into place, they set up this policy, Recology Recovers, in which they made the decision to still pay both their employees full salary and health benefits, even when they could not provide full schedules for a lot of their workers. They did this for about 2.5 months immediately after the shelter in place. So just, you know, a story that really demonstrates this data that we know that employee owners are going to be less likely to lose their jobs. So I'm going to keep rolling through some stats here. I was asked to present a lot of information. So this one talks about quality jobs and economic resiliency for workers. So this is a study also from the National Center for Employee Ownership from 2017. It shows that employee owners have wages that are about 1/3, again, as high as their peers, that they stick around in their jobs about 1/2 again as high, so their job tenure, and that their assets as measured by household net worth are about 2x as high. So if you just stop and think about if you could flip a switch and have this happen for your job, wouldn't that be great? I certainly would love that. And then the racial wealth gap, which is a really important part of the puzzle. So there's a study that shows study was done within employee stock ownership plans, one form of employee ownership, that showed that the median wealth of Latinx employees is almost 12 times that of Latinx households generally, and that Black ESOP employees have about 3 times the median wealth of Black households nationwide. And one of the really key things to this is that the wealth that comes through stock ownership is on top of regular employee compensation. So higher wages plus stock ownership that creates wealth. So these additive benefits. Okay, so I think I've gotten through the stats here. Deep breath. But for those of you who either want to look for citations or spread some information further or want to read more data, we just released a white paper called The Case for Employee Ownership. My co-founder Hillary authored it. It pulls together all of the recent data and really puts to rest any questions of does employee ownership have impact, and instead turns the conversation to why we need further investment in this really powerful business model. So I'm gonna, we don't have a ton of time for me to kind of do an employee ownership 101 and explain how it works. I'm gonna quickly go through some slides and we can delve more into the Q&A depending on interest. But some just high points here is that there are 2 most common forms of employee ownership. I've mentioned both of them. The first is an employee stock ownership plan. For reasons related to regulation tied to significant federal tax benefits, ESOPs are really have a size threshold. So really 40 or sometimes even 50 employees is typically the lower size threshold of an ESOP business. And then we have a worker-owned cooperative. Cooperatives are businesses owned and governed by and for the benefit of their members. So in a worker-owned cooperative, owned and governed by and for the benefit of their workers, their employees. What kind of companies can be good candidates for transitioning to employee ownership? The first is they have to be profitable. And we're talking profitable back in January, February, with three years of positive financial health. There is generally a size threshold overall for employee ownership. Right off the bat, we say 20 or more employees, though there can be good candidates that are 10 or more or even slightly smaller. Not to say that a startup strategy can't also be done, but we're focused on existing businesses making the transition to employee ownership. So these are businesses with a proven track record as well. And then how does this actually work financially? So one of the myths of employee ownership is that the employees have to find the money in their mattress or between the cushions of their sofa. And that is not the case. The employees essentially are becoming owners by the business buying itself from the owner out of the profit that their labor creates. So the business owner and the employee-owned business, decide on a sale price that can be financed by an outside lender, a bank, or a community development financial institution. And then the business is the one that takes out the loan and pays it back out of profits over time. So in terms of sources of capital, banks, community development financial institutions, I do want to mention that Project Equity, we have a joint initiative with a national CDFI called Shared Capital that enables us to bring financing to these transactions as well. Okay, so just a couple of more slides I want to share here, and mostly just as a resource for folks who are involved in this conversation. You will have the recording and the slides as well, but we think it is critically important because of all of the benefits of employee ownership for us as we are developing our rebuilding and recovery agendas at the local and the state and the federal level to incorporate employee ownership. So here are policy recommendations on all three of those levels. The American Sustainable Business Council just published their set of recommendations, which incorporated many of these. If you want to, the link is here starting on page 6. One thing that I do want to call out is that at the local level, we are seeing a tremendous amount of creativity with revolving loan funds. And this can be a really great way to incorporate employee ownership, whether it's with workforce, small business development centers, community foundations, or others. And then finally here, knowing that there's a whole range of folks involved and in this conference and on this call today, want everybody to be able to sort of find themselves and say, well, how could I do something here? So if you can find yourself on this list, here's some recommendations about how you could advance employee ownership. Most importantly, I want to call out the role of what we call a candidate spotter. So anybody who is in conversation with small businesses and recognizes a need for increased employee ownership, employee engagement, recognizes a need for succession planning, and knows a business that fits some of those criteria, 20 or more employees, profitable as of January, please put them in touch with an employee ownership expert who can help to overcome some of the incorrect understandings or myths about employee ownership that are out there. So with that, I will close, and my contact information is on the screen, Alison at projectequity.org, if anybody wants to be in touch. Thank you.
Alison, I'm taking notes on how well you navigated through that information while also sharing personalized examples of stories that are happening. So thank you for sharing that strategy, which can be so helpful to many of the equity challenges and also just concerns that businesses are facing during this season. So now I want to turn it over to Jason Wiener, who is here in Colorado, to share with us more specifically about Main Street Phoenix and also some of the ways that he is working to advance employer ownership in the state.
Thank you so much for having me, and thanks to my fellow panelists. Thank you, Alison, for laying the foundation in so many ways for all these thinking about. So I'm on behalf of the Main Street Phoenix project. I wear a few other hats relevant to today. I am a gubernatorial appointee to the Employee Ownership Commission. We are the only governor-appointed commission on employee ownership level anywhere in the country. We work in conjunction with the Office of Economic Development and International Trade, whose director, Betsy Markey, works directly with the governor. This is among the governor's top 3 agenda items, and employee ownership has been central to the small business and economic recovery in the state. I also founded and manage a boutique law firm based in Colorado here that focuses on broad-based ownership generally, employee ownership specifically, and all manner of support elements to operate, start, or convert to an employee-owned business. And there we go. Okay. So 3 days into the COVID crisis, the work that Alison, and others have been doing for more than a decade, specifically in the worker cooperative and employee ownership space, came into full focus. We see yet again, following 2008, another economic calamity that will threaten small business and threaten the most precarious workers in our economy first and foremost. And we see the ingredients for another episode of disaster capitalism to further economic consolidation, gender and racial economic inequality, and the erosion of small business identity and community-oriented business in America. And the work of converting small businesses to employee ownership for decades has been critical and has proven to be very effective, but it's been resource intensive and slow. And I've been doing conversions now for 10 years. And so 3 days into COVID, the fundamental tectonic plates of the need to preserve and protect small business came into focus. And we birthed a strategy here to accelerate, streamline, and simplify the conversion of a small Main Street business to employee ownership. We're focusing on 3 immutably brick and mortar, community-oriented small business sectors: restaurant and food service, childcare and daycare, and the third is personal care businesses: hair, nails, wax, massage. And these businesses define and house what we consider to be our communities. They also disproportionately employ women, people of color, and workers of undocumented status. And as a result, these workers are most at risk of unemployment and falling between the cracks in any safety net that's being developed federally or at the state level. Our strategy here has been to create a worker-owned holding company, which we have stood up here in Colorado. It's known as the Main Street Phoenix Workers Cooperative. It's an employee-owned cooperative that essentially creates a platform for the type of conversion work that Alison described earlier. We kind of remove the segmented agency of each individual player, the owner, the selling owner, the employees, the capital providers, and package it into a platform to simplify, streamline, and accelerate the process in a moment of crisis, and avoid either the baby boomer owner or the undercapitalized business owner, or the business owner who may have been precariously positioned before COVID to shut their doors, sell off their equipment, throw away the key, and move on to the next thing, leaving behind the wake of unemployed workers, primarily women and people of color. Our strategy is to be a strike force to engage selling owners, to provide them a modest lifeline as a way of preserving their legacy, first and foremost by protecting their workers. And so our strategy is to assemble a pool of capital from grants and from equity investment and debt partners to engage in the traditional tactics of private equity, except for the benefit of and to reward the workers. So our strategy is to engage selling owners in purchasing the business. We know that most of these businesses are in distress, and the valuations are, unfortunately for the owners, at decade-long lows. So by engaging selling owners in a roll-up, in a buyout, at this point in time, we can lock in the economic gain over the long term for the benefit of workers, using it primarily to create a resilience platform, a professional development platform and a scale platform that will allow worker owners to be brought into ownership of a portfolio of restaurants, childcare, and personal care businesses that de-risks what would otherwise be an individual business operating in a competitive environment with the unknowable risk of COVID and the volatility of their in-house or dine-in volume. We're hearing from the Colorado Restaurant Association and others that the risk of closure in the restaurant sector here is north of 25%. And unless we have 75% allowable occupancy on a dine-in basis, we will have our restaurants, our community spaces at risk of closing with no known date for reopening. We also know that this presents upstream risks to commercial real estate and to community development, looking at keeping local ownership of business. So a little bit more about how we've structured this. We have two components. So the Main Street Phoenix Workers Cooperative is, as I said, an employee-owned cooperative holding company that buys businesses in each of our different verticals into a group with kind of an aggregated and uniform back office to support group purchasing, group technology deployment, management training, professional development training, workforce development, scaled benefits, above market pay. And our financial model demonstrates upwards at scale, upwards of six-figure net excess spend per employee. And that's in addition to profit sharing and patronage dividends once we reach our target of 25 businesses and over 500 worker owners. There's also a philanthropically supported component to the project, which is to develop an open source toolkit and field guide for doing this work in other communities. We're calling this kind of our white label strategy, where we are documenting our process, our flow, our back office systems and processes, and our due diligence acquisition documents to empower communities in other parts of the country to adopt a similar strategy and deploy it locally with local leadership. And we'll support with matchmaking on fundraising, helping to kind of get the word out on the strategy, and support through the work that we're doing to build our core holding company. This is a little bit wonky, but what we're essentially doing is amalgamating a tried and true traditional private equity approach, except rather than inserting financially motivated limited partner investors, like Alison described, we're substituting financial investors for worker owners. And the worker owners are coming in to the holding company after some trial period of 6 months of work. They become eligible to be admitted with only a modest buy-in of $1,000 to $1,500 per person, which they can finance through payroll, as well as some third-party employee ownership, dedicated financial products that allow them to participate in a portfolio that will buy these businesses on day one through the financial support of lender capital, equity capital, and grant capital, which will be financed through ongoing cash flow and operational efficiency. And rather than scale these businesses up with debt and sell them off after cash flows have been improved, we're intending to buy and operate the portfolio and use the discretionary cash flow to support worker resilience and economic security. Each business will be a wholly owned subsidiary of the parent company and will be able to buy out existing owners at fairly modest multiples, with the potential for earnouts as if owners are willing to stay on and help manage through the transition. We're going to use a fairly standard tool in the employee ownership conversion space and use debt or equity earnouts for the seller to stay on and appreciate her upside as the business climate turns around. Our strategy this year is aggressive. We're taking a deliberately tactical and aggressive approach to acquire 10 businesses in the first year. This effort is just about 100 days old. We have a phenomenal advisory team. We're in the process of building out our leadership and executive team. We think that at scale over 5 years, our core holding company will be able to recruit 500 or more worker owners. That's probably from a pool of about 1,000 total workers with 25 businesses. We're hoping to achieve efficiency both on the purchasing side and also by reduced turnover. The average turnover in an individual food service business is approximately 100% per year. And yet workers stay in the industry, their tenure in the industry can be 7 years or more. If we can reduce that to 50 or even 60% turnover, our goals are more aggressive than that by providing quality jobs, management training, anti-bias and anti-racism training, and building a culture of inclusion, of job quality. We think that we can reduce turnover by improving working conditions, cross-training, professional development, and also better economic security through skilled benefits across our entire portfolio, 401k, health, so we'll exceed market standards. We're also looking at high road standards that are being deployed by One Fair Wage in California. We're talking with some folks that are doing work to move beyond the tipping system and also to levelize pay rates between back of house and front of house while addressing gender and racial inequities between those two segments of the business. We have aggressive targets, but we have incredibly solid partnerships, strong support from the philanthropy and impact investment community, and we're excited to share that with you all today. This is a homegrown Colorado enterprise, and our strategy is likely to scale the Intermountain region, New Mexico, Arizona, Colorado, Utah, with a real specific focus to launch here in Colorado, my hometown.
Jason, thank you so much for sharing your strategy. I'm just struck by how creative and innovative the approach is, particularly in an economic downturn when businesses struggle to stay alive. How do we really use collective buying power to make sure that businesses are still around so we have those community services, especially in industries like childcare, which we've been talking about is such a critical need. So we have a few moments for questions. If people do have questions, go ahead and drop those in the chat. Just to kick us off, for Alison and Jason, I'm wondering, many of the folks on the call today work directly with workers. And so if they are engaging with employees who are interested in maybe coming together, owning the business, they maybe work for someone who has been talking about potentially retiring or not sure about what will happen with the business, what training is available for them to explore their opportunities and to learn how to be good business owners if their business goes to an employee ownership model?
Jason, do you want to kick us off on that? Do you want me to?
No, please go ahead, Alison.
Yeah, so great question. And, you know, this transition of ownership from a small business owner or a couple of small business owners to the broad base of employees, the training question and the employee engagement is absolutely central to the success of that. The reality is at the start of the process, the conversation is focused with the business owner. And the reason for that is that the business owner is the owner, right? The business owner has to be excited about this strategy and be on board with it for it to move forward. That doesn't mean that the employees can't bring the idea to the business owner, but without really getting that buy-in, we can't move the business into a different ownership structure, right? So it's got to be the really powerful thing about employee ownership. It is it's one of these win-win-win all around. I talked about a slice of New York. My very first example, the pizzeria where the selling owner, this was a way for them to get liquidity out of their 10-year-old investment they invested everything into. And so for them, it was a really great fit because they already had a high employee engagement culture. But in terms of the components of the training that happen over time as that transition unfolds, it's everything from, okay, well, how does employee ownership work? Most people aren't familiar with employee ownership. We don't have neighbors and friends and uncles and cousins who have been involved in employee ownership because it is still, unfortunately, very underrepresented in our economy. So just how does it work in the first place? What does it mean for me as an employee? We always start with what are my responsibilities and rights rather than the other way around. the responsibilities of ownership and what are the rights that come with that. What does it mean to run a business? You know, personal finance 101, followed by business finance 101, followed by this business's business model and finances is how we approach that training. And then how do we together, so in a typical employee-owned company, so take a worker co-op, for example, if you have 50 employees, it's not everyone is together making collective decisions. You've got a board of directors where a subset of the employees are elected to make up the majority of the board. So maybe you've got 2 or 3 employee owners on the board, and the rest of the base of owners is electing the board and participating in strategic business conversations. And so making sure that the employees have the skills and knowledge and understanding to participate in those strategic decision conversations, and also to have conversations and ask what, you know, people might feel like, oh, I have a dumb question, to feel confident asking dumb questions when their boss and maybe their boss's boss is also in the room. So it's a whole range of employee training and engagement that happens throughout the process.
Great, thank you. The next question is, maybe Yustina, if you can take this, what general retail trends or differences are you seeing between cities versus mountain towns or other smaller towns?
I like for city versus mountain, I need to do a little bit more research, but like when we look at, you know, there's the supply chain of talent actually has a very, very significant impact. So in Denver and in Colorado, we saw a very strong emphasis on operational skills, but in a place like Chicago, there's a lot more emphasis on the digital analytics and all that was playing in more. I haven't looked at it from the angle of you know, is it more like the mountain versus city? That attribute I haven't checked, but we do see very, very significant differences in the skill shapes depending on, you know, the makeup of talent. New York City had a lot of the project management skills also included in retail, and you see like even retail, even like just being at the tangent of a lot of consulting versus at the tangent of a lot of arts, could shape it very, very significantly. But this is an interesting one to look further into.
And in the interest of time, I'll take one last question, and that's going to be Tamara's question for Janine. But Jason or Alison, I'm wondering if you could respond to the question in the chat from Kim about what trends you're seeing about employee ownership in manufacturing. So respond to Kim in the chat, and then Janine, this question is for you. What does loss prevention look like in a self-service mini market?
That's a great question. We're asked that very often. It varies, honestly, between what the location is. So if you took a hotel, for example, we've actually seen substantial increases in revenue that we attribute to just the convenience aspect of it. A guest who picks something up and doesn't want to go stand in line, or feels like that's an inconvenience or a fear, they lose the revenue, often what we call abandoned transactions. And so there's a loss there, or they take it almost out of a kind of sense of entitlement that you inconvenienced me during my hospitable stay. And they kind of justify taking that bottle of water, and some think they'll come back later. That's a little bit different. In our actual brick and mortar retail store that we have in downtown Denver, because it is retail attended by an attendant who is present, I think we don't experience that as often as you might in a truly unattended retail environment where there is no one. And so we are really fighting for that, you know, between your Amazon Go store that is truly unattended and they have all kinds of technology to lock you down and make sure you pay. We're really trying to prove out that self-service can be attended, that self-service can be hospitable, and still be an engagement, still be an employment opportunity, while always, of course, conscious of theft or the general concerns that retailers would have. But we have seen over and over that revenue typically increases with the self-service because it's really the convenience aspect that drives someone to not complete the transaction or to take the item, more so than just, you know, malice of theft, or just taking something out of theft. If you provide a convenient way for them to do it and do it quickly without wait, because we are a right now society, then that self-service aspect can actually increase revenue.
I could talk to all of you for hours. Unfortunately, we are at time. So grateful for you just sharing your experiences and your expertise with us that really help us think about the future of retail and how the industry is changing. If we can drop or launch the feedback form, and people just take a quick moment to fill out that form. Thank you all to our speakers, and then we will get into the chat box a link to the next session on health and safety.
Thank you so much, everyone, for your participation today.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. See you in the next session.